November 11th, it's Remembrance Day. And I wanted to remember a couple of things that I thought might be relevant to all of us, and particularly relevant to me. The first thing I want to talk about is Hugh Arthur Crombie. Here's a picture of my grandfather, Hugh Arthur Crombie. He was um, 18 years old, 1916, and volunteered to join the war effort and went off to fight in France, was wounded on Vimy Ridge, and earned a bunch of medals. Let me show you the medals that I'm proud to have in my front hall, exhibiting the valor that he and so many of his fellow soldiers had. Why do we remember our veterans on Remembrance Day? I think we do it because some of our family members, some of our friends, some of our countrymen were wounded, were killed, fought in unbelievable circumstances. Not only my grandfather, but a second cousin lost his life in World War II. I had three cousins that fought in the military, one in the Army and Vietnam, two in the Navy, one in a submarine, one on an Air Force carrier. And the gentleman that was in Vietnam in the Army suffered from PTSD his whole life, never recovered from the harrowing experience that was that. And so I think about some of those experiences, and I think about the suffering, and I think about the valor, and I think about fighting for freedom. I think we need to remember. I think the second reason that we've got to think about this is that not only did people fight in the past, but they're fighting today. You know, we had obviously World War I and World War II and the Korean War. In the United States, they had Vietnam. We've had the war in Afghanistan, the war in the United States, and the war in Iraq. We've got peacekeeping missions around the world. People throughout life have, throughout history, have continued to fight. To keep the peace, to fight for democracy, to fight for freedom. And we need to remember that. 30 years ago, almost the last couple of days, the fall of the Berlin Wall occurred. And some people thought that history was over, that war was over, that fighting was over, that the Cold War certainly was finished. And 9/11 proved that was wrong, and the Afghanistan war proved that was wrong. And how many different fights that continue to this day prove that regrettably history didn't end in the fall of the Berlin Wall, and strife has continued. So I think that not only do we remember people in the past, but we need to remember people currently that and that have continued to fight and give of their lives. I think the third reason that's worth thinking about is that we have our own fight. Today, our own fights today. And this U.S. election has been fascinating. Number one issue for a whole bunch of people was COVID-19. And we've had huge infections in Canada. They've had a lot more in the United States, deaths, infections and deaths around the world. It is really one of the fights that we have right now. And when you think about what we asked our grandparents to do in World War I and our grandparents and our parents in World War II, and people we know today in putting on a uniform and fighting. And you compare that to what we're being asked to do in regards to physical distancing and wearing masks. If this truly is one of the fights of our generation, we should be a little bit more willing to sacrifice for the greater good than it appears we currently are. I think one of the other wars that we have is the war against climate change, and it's something that I think is going to define our generation, and we're going to have to take it more seriously. And I believe that one of the things that COVID-19 may have taught us is to listen to the scientists a little bit more. I think that obviously there's a lot of people around the world. We've seen it unquestionably more evident in the United States election, but that don't believe in the scientists and rebel against them. And it's made it a partisan issue. But we should believe in the scientists. And the scientists, I think, have resoundingly said climate change is a major issue. And it's, I believe, the issue for our generation. And so therefore, we need to think about how we can fight that climate change issue. And frankly, the future existence of humanity, the way that our grandparents and great-grandparents and parents fought in World War I, World War II, Korean War, etc. And then I think, in addition, and this may be a little bit overly political, but I think what we fought for in World War I, World War II, in the Cold War, Korean War, etc., was for democracy. And I think we take democracy for granted way too often. And I think that the actions, whether you agreed with Donald Trump or Joe Biden as far as the election was concerned, the actions that Donald Trump, the president of the United States right now, is taking in regards to disputing the fairness of the election, saying that there was massive fraud in the United States of America, I think really calls into question the fight for democracy. And I worry that he's going to tarnish the image of democracy around the world, and certainly in the United States. And if we had seen someone in Belarus make some of the claims that Donald Trump is making, or in other third world countries, or former, dictatorships or communist countries, I think we'd call them on it. But for some reason, it's just not happening now. At least not with half the population and the GOP leadership. And so I think that it's an incredible shame that people gave up their lives to fight for freedom, democracy in World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and lots of other wars since then, and are still doing it today. And yet someone who was and still is the president of the United States is really not standing up for democracy, and is frankly almost standing up for authoritarianism. And it really bothers me. And so I think we need to think about that on Remembrance Day. So I want to remind you of my granddad, Hugh Arthur Crombie, who was a fantastic gentleman. He was volunteered in 1916 to go to war. He won medals. He was wounded at Vermery Ridge. And then he came back and established himself in business. And during World War II, he was a $1-a-year man working on the munitions, Canadian Munitions Association, trying to figure out how we could manufacture munitions and ship it over to the Allied forces in Europe. And a million other gentlemen like him and women like him that gave their time. He did not give his life, but he was wounded. Those that gave their lives, not only in World War I, not only in World War II, but in the Korean War and the Afghan War, and lots of other wars since then. I want to remember democracy and freedom. I want to remember that the fights that we have today just don't appear to be as big a sacrifice for us as they were for our grandparents. And I want to remember that we all have a responsibility for our democratic institutions, for our democracy, for our freedom. And we need to remember the people that put down their lives in the past, and we need to do not the same, but something as well today. Thank you.